Now, we have a special kind of constructor called the copy constructor, which is used for copying objects. So here we have a rectangle object. Now, if we create a second rectangle and set it to the first one, a copy of the first rectangle is taken and stored in the second rectangle object. So we have two independent objects in memory. Now, the reason copying works is because under the hood, the compiler automatically generates a copy constructor in the rectangle class. This copy constructor takes a source object, in this case, the first rectangle, and then it will copy all the values in this object into the second object. Now, this copy constructor works perfectly fine pretty much all the time, but there are special situations where we need to have control over how objects are copied. We'll look at a real example of that later in the course. Now, in these situations, we need to explicitly define a copy constructor to decide how objects are copied. Let me show you how to do it. So, back to our header file, let's declare a new constructor. Now, this constructor should have a single parameter. The type of the parameter has to be the same as the class, because that is the object we're copying, right? Now, we have to make this a reference parameter, because if we don't do so, the compiler doesn't know how to copy this object, because the copy operation is going to be defined in this constructor. Also, we should make this a constant parameter, so we don't accidentally modify the source object as part of the copy operation, okay? So let's call this parameter source. Now let's generate the definition for this constructor. Good. Now I don't know what happened to my parameter name, so that's going to be source. And I prefer to put the ampersand right next to the class name, okay? So for clarity, I want to print a message and saying rectangle copied. Now here we're going to define how a rectangle is going to be copied to another rectangle. So we're going to set the width of the current object to source.width. Similarly, we're going to copy the height and the color. Okay? Now there is a problem with this approach. If tomorrow we decide to add a new member variable in the rectangle class, we have to remember to come back and modify the copy constructor to copy that member variable as well. If we don't do so, we're going to create bugs that are hard to find. That is why it's always best to rely on the copy constructor that the compiler generates for us, okay? So now back to our main file. So we have one rectangle and we're copying that into a second rectangle. Let's run the program and see what happens. Okay, so first we're constructing a rectangle. That is our first rectangle. And then over here, you can see we copied that rectangle into a second rectangle. Now, objects are also copied when we pass them to functions. So let me define a function here. Say show rectangle. That takes a rectangle. Now here we don't want to do anything. I just want to show you that if we pass a rectangle object to this function, that rectangle gets copied. So let's remove this line and instead call the show rectangle function. Okay, now take a look. Again, we're constructing a rectangle and then we're copying it. Obviously, if we make this a reference parameter, our rectangle is not copied. The source object is passed to the show rectangle function. So let's verify it. There you go. So no copying is done in this case. Now there are situations where we want to stop the copy operation. We want to prevent an object from being copied by value. In those situations, we can explicitly delete the copy constructor. So upon declaration, we set this to the delete keyword. And now we have to go back to our implementation file and remove this constructor. So what we're doing here is that we're telling the compiler to delete the copy constructor for us. If we don't add this line, you know that the compiler automatically generates the copy constructor for us. So now, if we delete it, look what happens. In our main file, if we remove the reference parameter, we get an error saying call to deleted constructor of rectangle. So we cannot pass a rectangle object by value to this function. Similarly, we cannot copy a rectangle to another one. Again, we get a compilation error because the copy constructor is deleted.